friendlies. Yo boys, I think you dropped this!
Liberty emerges victorious yet again. Extract when ready.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call Liberty's overkill. Enemy design is a key part of designing games, for your players are only as strong as the enemies they fight. There's a reason games like Dark Souls are known for their difficulty. It's not just because of the mechanics, but the design philosophy behind the enemies that makes those games a serious challenge. And this is an area Helldivers 2 excels in. Whether you're analyzing a particular enemy or the two factions overall, Helldivers 2 enriches its game with a lot of variety in its enemy design. However, when you play the game, you'll soon notice that most of the player base favors a particular enemy faction over the other, with most players settling for the relaxing turkey shoot that is the Terminid front instead of the masochistic slaughter that is the Automaton front. But why is that? Why do casual players find the bots so difficult? Fortunately, the answer we're looking for can be found by breaking down the differences in enemy design in Helldivers 2. Both the enemy factions have their own unique flavors of gameplay, which on the surface can appear quite rudimentary. The bugs are the faster, melee-based army, whereas the bots are the tankier, more range-based army. However, these differences in design go much deeper than just how they fight. As I mentioned before, the bots rely more on heavier armor and firepower, which puts more emphasis on the players to study their enemy, to understand where and how to exploit the automaton's vulnerabilities. For it is not DPS, but game knowledge that allows players to succeed on higher difficulties, because they're basically an army of tanks. Sometimes literally. For example, let's take the Scout Strider. It's a well-armored piece of walking socialist scrap metal, boasting a surprisingly formidable armament at its front. However, due to the automaton's incompetence, they left the entire back of the cockpit unarmored, which leaves the pilot quite vulnerable to flanking maneuvers. But that's obvious. However, what isn't as obvious is the fact that the legs are less armored, which makes them a vulnerability for certain weapons. And this is a common trend we see in the bot's design as an enemy faction. The more elite automatons tend to have an obvious weak point, which is usually located on their backs, whilst also possessing a handful of subtler vulnerabilities that may kill them or disrupt their ability to damage players. This emphasis on game knowledge is not nearly as prevalent with the design of the Terminids, for the bugs don't give players the room to engage with those portions of Helldivers 2. Literally, they swarm you with a horde of lightly armored enemies before you can establish a plan of attack, which then devolves into relying on the simple strategic philosophy of run, gun, bring anti-tank. The issue lies with the staggering contradictions between the designs of both enemy factions, for they are not equal at a design level. The automatons demand far more from the player than the Terminids do. The bots require good target selection, greater game knowledge, and better accuracy to achieve an optimal time to kill, which are skills that players do not develop as strongly when fighting the bugs. Another significant difference between the overall designs of the Terminids compared to the automatons is how they telegraph their attacks. Now, telegraphing is when someone conveys a message, either intentionally or not, through visual or audible cues. In video games, telegraphing is a core aspect for when designers are constructing an attack of any kind. We want the players to know exactly what's coming at them, and this is done by breaking up the anatomy of an attack into 3 stages: the anticipation, the attack, and the recovery. We can see a great example of this in Helldivers 2 with the charger. Before initiating its charge, the undemocratic monstrosity rears its head upwards before barreling towards the player, and when it concludes its rampage, the undemocratic monstrosity stops and recuperates before it starts trying to reacquire another target. This obvious telegraphing is a trend seen in many of the other Terminids, whether it's the Bile Titan, the Spewers, or even something as small as the Hunters. The players probably don't notice it too often due to the fact that they're busy running for their lives constantly. Loud telegraphs are a key aspect behind the design of the Terminids, whereas for the Automatons, Arrowhead basically said, screw it, and chucked it in the bin alongside the Arc Thrower. Yeah, the bots are very much the opposite to the Terminids when it comes to telegraphing their attacks, favouring a far subtler approach with very little anticipation before they strike at the player. The Flame variant of the Hulk gives players a measly, 2 frames before incinerating most of their health bar, and the Rocket Devastators have no recovery. Tell me, has this Devastator fired its rockets? How about this one? And what about this one? Can you tell? No, you can't. The automatons disregard most of the anatomy behind designing an attack. They have very little anticipation and no recovery for most of their attacks. So, when swapping from fighting the bugs to fighting the bots, players are greeted with this serious clash in design philosophy and are then thrusted into a part of Helldivers 2 that rarely communicates with them. The last point I'll talk about is how each enemy faction affects the players, and how their different designs strike at 2 completely different areas of the player's arsenal: their movement and their power! For the Terminids, a core part of every strategy is to constantly be on the move. So, the developers designed the bugs to use tools that disrupt player movement, with many of them possessing some form of slowing debuff or gap closer, like the Spewers and Shriekers. These tools are designed to compromise and alter how players move whilst fighting the Terminids, which at times can feel frustrating when you're busy being swarmed by 20 bugs. But what isn't present at all in the Terminids toolbox is a proper challenge, but more importantly, debuffs or objectives that strike at the player's power! And every player was happy to keep it this way, but then everything changed when the automatons attacked, bringing along their AA defenses and stratagem jammers. These devious socialist contraptions are designed to strike where it hurts the most, at the player's stratagems. This is because the majority of the player's power budget is found in their stratagems. For the power budget is definitely not found in the player's primaries, that's for sure, especially if it's an AR. But when the game presents the player with a problem, an easy solution is to just throw a stratagem at it and hope for the best. So, how does Arrowhead make the bots more challenging? Well, they simply remove 1/4 of the player's power, or all of it. And yes, I know, they removed the AA Defense's operation modifier in the recent patch, but this was written and recorded before that patch, so I don't want to see any of this actually crap in the comments section, alright? We know your mother doesn't love you and that your dad left to get the milk 10 years ago. Deal with it. This drastic contrast between where both enemies affect the player reinforces the disparity between their designs, further emphasizing that the bugs and the bots are nowhere near close to being equal with each other. So, to wrap things up, why does the casual player base find the automatons so difficult? Well, at its core, Helldivers 2 provides players with a lot of experiences. The different enemy designs have contributed to Helldivers' success and longevity, for the players have the choice to fight between 2 very distinct armies. But said armies are not equal on a design level, and this is intentional. Games like Helldivers 2 draw in a spectrum of players from all different walks of play, and so the designers need to accommodate that and provide experiences that not only satisfy the casual players, but also the hardcore ones. This means that players who want to switch from primarily fighting the bugs to the bots are going to struggle. The design philosophies behind each army create a significant jump in difficulty for the players, which will deter them from migrating. From bug to bot, the brutality of the difficulty will scare them away from trying. And from bot to bug, the boredom will kill players faster than the Terminids can. As someone who has spent his 100+ hours in Helldivers 2 primarily fighting the automatons, I can tell you personally it can get a bit frustrating when most of the player base leaves our front to fend for itself. But that's how design goes. It will influence players' decisions and encourage certain behaviors. And unfortunately for us on the bot front, our enemy is just not designed for the casual player base, nor will it ever be. For the bots are designed to be a challenge, to test the player's game knowledge and skill. They are the option that Arrowhead developed for players like myself who seek to be challenged by an experience. And that's why the casual player base finds the automatons so difficult to fight. That's why the automatons are the tougher enemy. It's supposed to be this way, and it should always stay that way. Well, until the squids show up, but that's neither here nor there. Also, one quick note before the video ends. I've seen some people say that the bugs are somehow harder than the bots, which is like, I'm sorry, what? Are we playing the same game? That's just not the case. Dude, that's just a skill issue if I've ever seen one. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed what you saw, then I implore you to subscribe to the channel. I definitely didn't just use the same take from the previous video, alright? There's no evidence, no evidence. Until then, take care.